Welcome to Practice Intimacy. This is the place to be to learn all about love, sex, and how to have the best relationships you possibly can. I am Jami Lynn. I'm a marriage and family therapist in the Austin area, and today we're going to be talking about attachment theory. So this is part of our Relationship 101 series, and before you can really, I wouldn't say do well in relationship, it's possible to do well in relationship no matter what, but before you can really begin to understand your experience of relationship and how you could become better in relationship, first you have to get to know yourself a little bit. And one of my favorite models for starting to understand yourself and how you engage with a romantic partner is attachment theory. So let me give you just a little bit of history because it's helpful, and then I'm going to do a broad overview of the different attachments. And then next week we'll get a little bit more in depth into each one. So history first. Attachment theory was first developed back in the 50s and 60s by a man named John Bowlby. At this moment, I cannot remember if he was a child psychiatrist or a pediatrician. That part doesn't actually matter too much, but I know that he was involved in the medical field. He was interested in child development, and he was looking at family relationships and child relationships during World War II. He was in England, and part of what he was witnessing is that during air raids, the government would just take children out of their parents' home to protect them. And this was thought to be the best practice, but then the psychological effects it had on those children became really interesting to Bowlby, because for most of the history of Western thought before that, the idea was that the parent-child relationship, it doesn't actually affect children that much. It's not that big of a deal if they aren't close. If you even think back to like behavioral model being popularized, there was a researcher named B.F. Skinner who published a book that said, no, you don't actually need to attend to your children. The best thing for them is to occasionally maybe pat them on the back and talk to them like good job, but really just treat them like little adults. Don't give them hugs. Don't encourage crying. Moms should not be close to their children because it's going to hurt them. And this book sold tens of thousands of copies. And that was the idea that a lot of people prescribed to for a very long time in at least white history. It would be different in other cultures, but in Western world, white history, this is the kind of thing that people learned. And thank goodness for someone like John Bowlby who started to actually look at how is this affecting a child? How are they reacting whenever they're taken from their mom? What is it like for them whenever they're reunited? And out of his research, we discovered different ways that children respond to the caregiving relationship. And then, thankfully, more people have studied attachment theory as the decades have gone by, and we've started to understand how it affects our romantic relationships into adulthood now too, which is what I'm mostly going to be talking about. But the history of how this came about was through watching children interacting with their caregivers. The next person who really contributed to this field of research and understanding about development is a woman named Mary Ainsworth. She created an experiment that was really one of a kind. It was phenomenal, called the strange situation. And in this experiment, what they would do is they'd have a mom come in with a baby who was mobile, so around 18 months old, and mom would go into a room with a stranger who would be sitting in one chair doing something, maybe reading a paper, but doing something, engaged in some way. And there'd be toys all over the place, and they would watch to see what would happen with baby while mom was present in the room, what would happen when mom left the room for a period of time, a couple of minutes, and then what would happen when she returned. And all of this is how we learned about attachment theory. So let me just talk to you today about what would happen with each of those kiddos in the experiment. So there are 4 different types of attachment based on Mary Ainsworth's work. Her contribution not only was to bring research, empirical data into attachment theory, but also she discovered that there was a different attachment style that Bowlby had never talked about. So she added a 4th one. Let me just talk briefly about those 4, and then I'll go into detail of what happened during the experiment with each one. I'm going to list them real quick first, then I'll break them down a little bit. The 4 different types are secure attachment, anxious attachment, avoidant attachment, and disorganized attachment. The way I break these up in my mind is the 3 first ones, secure, anxious, and avoidant, those all fall into one category for me. They're organized. Disorganized falls into its own category. I will talk about why that is true for me, why I think of it that way, in just a little bit. But let's just kind of move through them. With a kiddo who had a secure attachment to mom, what they saw was when they're in the room by themselves, when they're in the room with mom and the stranger, they play, they'll engage in play, but they'll keep checking in with mom to see if she's there. They might be curious about the stranger, but they don't go up to them unless mom is encouraging of it. And overall, the feeling is comfort in the room. I can explore, mom is here, all is well. Mom leaves the room and the child will try to follow and then usually will cry at the door, might do a little bit of self-soothing behavior, rocking, things like that, hands and mouth. But when mom comes back, the child cries for a little bit, mom picks them up, consoles them, eventually they come back into regulation and they can begin exploring the room again. With the next category of attachment, a child who is anxious, what would happen is when mom comes into the room, it might be that the kiddo is a little bit less willing to explore. They might not do the same exploratory behavior. They might not be interested in the person who's there. There's a little bit more clinginess with mom and like checking with mom rather than the exploratory behaviors. And then when mom leaves, the child is crying almost inconsolably. Similar to the first one, no kid, well, you'll see, most kids do not like to be left alone. And then when mom comes back, the difference between the securely attached child and this child is when mom comes back and tries to console the baby after leaving, there's this push-pull experience where I want your comfort, don't put me down, but as you're trying to comfort me, I can't really take it in, and part of me is trying to push away from mom. This doesn't feel good. And the amount of time that goes by before baby finally calms down is much longer than with a child who is securely attached to that caregiver. The next one is the anxiously attached kiddo. And I should say this now, I'm going to say it again at the end because it's very important. I actually don't think of them as an anxiously attached kiddo. That's not correct language, even though I said it. A lot of the times I hear myself saying that, but that's not actually correct language. The attachment between this child and the caregiver is what is avoidant. It's not the baby. Our attachments are actually adaptive to whatever family we grew up in, with whichever people we interact with as children. So it's not about the child being insecurely attached. No, it's about the attachment between this kiddo and the person that they are closest to having an insecure attachment. So I will say more about that at the end, but it's good to just kind of correct myself, get the right language, make sure that I am communicating this well, because so often we think of ourselves as I am this attachment. It means I'm bad, or it means I can't change, when really that's not true. It just means you learned something whenever you were young. It was not actually adaptive. Well, at the time it was adaptive. It is no longer adaptive in your life once you reach adulthood and you can shape the relationships you have. And so over-identifying a person with an attachment is not helpful. Instead, it is helpful to recognize that an attachment is a relational dance between, one that can change as you grow up. Thank goodness. So with the avoidantly attached child, what's happening is when mom brings them in, they probably don't pay much attention to mom. They might play with the toys. They really ignore the stranger. They don't give them much attention at all. But there's not much of the checking in to see if mom is still there and if mom is encouraging play and exploration. It's just kind of like baby's gonna do whatever they're doing, and it seems like they're not engaged with anyone on the outside. Mom leaves, and it seems like there's no reaction. Baby just keeps doing whatever they're doing. When mom comes back, same thing. No reaction. Baby just keeps doing what they're doing. In later research, they actually checked the vital signs of these kiddos, and what they found is that their heart rate actually gives away a sense of discomfort and feeling unsafe. So the baby might be continuing to do the thing they do when mom leaves, but their heart rate picks up a lot on the monitors. And there's also more sweat on their body whenever mom is gone. And eventually, after mom comes back, that will all calm down again. But it takes a long time before it calms down. The last category of attachment that we talk about is called disorganized. And with this one, what they would see is mom would bring in kiddo, and kiddo would seem, it'd be different each time. Sometimes the kiddo would seem like they were playing and totally fine. Sometimes they would present as the more anxious. Sometimes they would present as more avoidant. Like, it just kind of depended. But what really, really helped Mary Ainsworth and other researchers to start categorizing this group was that mom would leave, and then whenever she came back, the baby would move towards, but then behave in a really strange way, where they would not completely go towards. They might collapse and start crying inconsolably on the floor. They might start rocking. They might collapse into almost a dissociative state, where it looks like the baby has drifted away a little bit or is so helpless that they've almost crumbled in on themselves. This is the least common of the attachments. But what they have discovered through working with this particular form of attachment is that there is something in the attachment with the caregiver, that the baby is scared of that person. And it's usually for one of two reasons. Either that caregiver is associated with being scary, or that caregiver themselves is actually scared and moving through the world in a space of feeling terrified. And so the baby is not able to actually soothe their nervous system when they're in contact with this caregiver. That's really all that attachment theory is about. How able is the baby at resonating with another person's nervous system so that they can be soothed? And this really depends on the caregiver. This isn't about the baby. If the caregiver has a secure attachment with their child, then they're living in a space of being relatively calm, able to continually try and meet their baby's needs, knowing that they're going to do it imperfectly, because that's part of parenthood, but also continuing to try until eventually the child is consoled, not giving up, not getting frustrated, not getting angry, at least most of the time. Let's be real. Raising a child is hard. I have not actually done it, but I've watched many people do it, and I'm fascinated by it. So I've also done a ton of research into child development. And raising a kiddo is hard. There are times whenever you will be dysregulated yourself taking care of a kiddo. But what matters is how often is that happening. There is research that says 70% of the time we're actually mismatched. And the other 30% of the time we're attempting to come back into harmony with each other. And so there can actually be a lot of mismatch. What matters is, am I continually trying to come back into harmony with my kiddo? Am I soothing myself so that I can soothe them? Am I persistently attempting to meet their needs? With an anxious kiddo, a couple of things could be happening. Really often it could be that parents themselves, the caregiver themselves, it's not always parents, but whoever's the caregiver, might have a more anxious style themselves. They might be moving through the world with some anxiety. And with an anxious kiddo, the sense is, I cannot count on my caregiver to provide the care I need. Sometimes they do it, but not always. And sometimes they get frazzled whenever I'm really inconsolable, and they'll leave me alone, either truly physically, I'm done here, I can't do this anymore, I give up, or they check out and they're so dysregulated that they're just gone and baby no longer is able to make the connection with them. And that's how you get that push-pull experience. Sometimes you're here for me, so I'm gonna try, but it's also uncertain whether or not you're going to be able to meet me in the way that I need you. So, I don't know what to do. Another thing that sometimes happens with the anxiously attached kiddos is they learn, I have to manage your internal world, caregiver. I have to manage your internal world so that you're okay, so that you can take care of me. Children have to be taken care of. They cannot fend for themselves. They need caregivers to do it for them. And so I might be overly involved in the other person's experience and trying to manage their experience so that they can meet me in the way that I need. Avoidantly attached folks, if there's an avoidant attachment between child and caregiver, usually what that kiddo has learned is I cannot count on my person to console me, take care of me, regulate me. For whatever reason, caregiver is not available for that. Usually what that might look like is just being kind of turned away, either energetically or like truly physically. I'm not paying much attention to my kiddo. Whenever they cry, I don't go to them. When they try to get my attention, I don't pay attention. It could be for a number of reasons that a person's in that space. One of the saddest reasons would be things like postpartum depression, where a parent is so depressed that they actually cannot meet their child's needs in the way that they would want to and in the way that the kiddo actually really needs in order to develop in a way that is secure. But then there's also folks who are just a little bit less able to be in relationship, most of the time because of their own attachment histories and their own experiences in their families, where there just wasn't a lot of the close connectedness. And so they don't know how to do that for their kiddo. I said I would talk about why I categorize these into two different ways, the organized and disorganized, and let's just go there for a moment. The three attachment styles that I first talked about, which you can think of them as security and the insecure ones being avoidant and anxious, they all have an organization to them. I know what to expect in relationship. If I am securely attached, I can expect that other people are soothing and regulating. Not all the time, but most of the time, and they will keep trying to soothe and regulate with me. Anxious ones learn something along the lines of people around me are not okay, and I need to change the way I'm behaving in order to make them okay so that we can regulate together. The avoidant folks, they learn I can't count on other people to be with me in a way that feels good. It is easier to just take care of myself. All of those are organized. My brain has a certain way of experiencing the world, and it makes sense to me. Disorganization, because of the element of like fear and terror in it, our brain is not actually equipped to create categories for that kind of experience. What happens is they get a little bit fractured in our psyche. They get fractured in our memory. And when we try to recall them, which usually we don't try and recall them because they're painful, but they get triggered by something else going on in the world and we remember them. And it happens as a flood. So a flood experience would be, it's kind of like taking over my system. It's taking over my brain. What I mean whenever I say fractured is there's this piece of information that might come up if I'm triggered. And when it does, it's holding a pocket of terror and feeling alone and helpless in it. That's what disorganization is. I need other people in order to survive the reality of being human. My caregiver is scary to me sometimes, and I feel helpless to do anything about that. Those two things together make it to where that little one, and then eventually as you grow up, this continues, that little one has these pockets of internal knowing that are kind of dissociated from the rest of their being. And if they touch those pockets of knowing, it is terrifying. It is so scary. And the world feels like an unsafe place because of that. At any moment that could be triggered and I feel scared and I might not even know why. This is a real introduction into attachment theory. Attachment theory, man, there's so much research on this. It's a wonderful subject. If you are interested in reading a book that I find to be really helpful, it's a pretty accessible read. It's easy and fun. It's called Attached, and it's a great way to begin to learn more about yourself and how you might experience an attachment to your partner. Next week, I'll go into attachment theory just a little bit more, and I'll talk about how these different categories are experienced by adults, what it might actually sound like, what it might actually look like, and it'll give you a sense of your own experience with attachment. I know this is information heavy. I don't think it's absolutely necessary to know this kind of thing to be in a relationship well. I just don't. I don't think you need this information. However, I think it can be incredibly powerful to understand and learn about yourself in these ways so that you can start to make sense of the reactions you have and begin to take care of yourself a little bit differently so that you can be in relationship in a different way than what you learned how to do whenever you were young. Because it is possible that what you learned whenever you were young is not actually a clear picture of what is possible, how you could be in a relationship, how you could feel whenever you become close to other people. I hope you enjoyed this video. I will see you next week in the next installment of Attachment. And if you liked this, please hit the like button, subscribe to my channel, and I will see you later. Bye for now.